VHS, synthwave, blood, guts, and gore. When it comes to the world of horror, no decade is more important than the 1980s. Expansive slasher franchises brought the genre more into the mainstream, while visionary directors conjured up new terrors that coincided with new film technology. The films created within this decade have become horror classics, defining the genre's landscape today. Therefore, when it comes to the world of haunt events, the stories and characters fostered during this decade act as a great inspiration to some of the most popular and well-made haunted attractions. In the case of Universal's Halloween Horror Nights, the biggest haunt of them all, the creative team has really leaned into the retro aesthetics and imagery and adapted them for the modern era, using the decade as the primary theme for both 2018 and 2019's HHN event. So here I want to go back to those 2 years of HHN, look at the various offerings, and examine why they worked as representations of the decade that they were based on. Without further ado, please be kind and rewind with me as we see how HHN truly honors the 1980s. Horror films of the 1980s at HHN are nothing new. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, 80s film icons such as Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, and Chucky made defined appearances at the event, hosting their fair share of haunted houses. However, these appearances were only tangentially connected to the decade, being centered around the characters themselves rather than strictly the films that they were based on. It wouldn't be until 2013 where one house would come to the event that set the blueprint for adapting 80s horror into effective and popular haunted houses. That house? An American Werewolf in London. Based on the cult classic 1981 John Landis film, this house would bring iconic scenes to life such as the Piccadilly Massacre, the various dream sequences, and the legendary werewolf transformation, utilizing state-of-the-art puppetry effects to honor the prosthetic genius of Rick Baker and generally carry a precise attention to detail while also being scary. Because of this, it was extremely successful, winning House of the Year in 2013 and even coming back in 2015 for the event's 25th anniversary. While there would be other impressive throwback houses that came afterwards, An American Werewolf in London was really what brought the concept to new heights and is paramount to understanding the use of nostalgia in the years that followed. Now, even though I emphasized the growth in nostalgic properties during the mid-2010s at HHN, it would be a more contemporary IP that would seemingly open the door for a full-on 80s event year: Netflix's Stranger Things. In April of 2018, Stranger Things would be announced as the first haunted house for that year's Horror Nights in both Orlando and Hollywood. And from there, other announcements would show that it wasn't just this house that would reflect the 1980s, but that many of the other houses, scare zones, shows, and overall event theming for Halloween Horror Nights 28 would pay grand tribute to certain aspects of the decade and its influence on the horror genre. HHN 28 would also be the biggest event yet, with 10 haunted houses split evenly between 5 IPs and 5 originals, and running for a grand total of 36 nights between September 14th and November 3rd. It seemed as if Universal was going all out for this event in honoring the decade, so let's take a waltz through those arches and truly see how they did so. The first house you would encounter at HHN 28 would unsurprisingly be the previously mentioned Stranger Things. Located in Soundstage 22, this house would bring many of the first season's most iconic scenes to life, featuring depictions of all the show's most recognizable characters as they search for their missing friend, Will Byers. The set pieces would be very detailed, containing the same attention to detail found in the show's production design due to collaboration with the show's creators. Locations like the Byers home, Hawkins Middle School, and of course the Upside Down would be brought to life really well, and while the scares weren't as intense as it got for this year, this house carried a similar eeriness that the show did, making it a good fit for HHN tonally speaking. Like the first season of the show, the subtle aesthetics of the early 1980s would be all over this house, from the costumes to the set pieces to the general gritty texture of the atmosphere. This made it not only a great introduction to the level of decade-based theming they would carry through the other event offerings, but also allowed those more unfamiliar with the decade's aesthetics to find a solid entry point. As many of you know, Stranger Things has a history of extreme popularity when it comes to HHN, and that all began with this house, which was not only the most most popular house of HHN 28, but also won House of the Year when everything was said and done. Again, while this house wasn't specifically featuring a property from the 1980s, what they did with the decade when it came to this house struck a chord with people, leading to greater thematic cohesion when it came to the other offerings. Speaking of other offerings, the premier 80s based throwback IP for this year would be Poltergeist. Based on the 1982 Tobe Hooper film and located in Soundstage 25, this house would be a surprise for many, bringing the cult classic story of a haunted home invasion to real life. Like An American Werewolf in London, here we have source material that stands as something truly rooted in the decade. However, from the empty swimming pool facade to the scenes of the house itself, everything was translated in such a way that brought the nostalgia and the horror together very well, while also leaving room for some additional story elements, specifically in the previously unseen light section. This was not featured at all in the movie, so this is something completely original to the Halloween Horror Nights house that they put together, really showing the emphasis on bringing something new to something nostalgic. The practical effects were great and felt very inspired by those found in the original film, and the combination of visual and oral iconography really made the whole experience feel three-dimensional, hearing film score and dialogue as these monsters from the tube TV screen were standing right in front of you. While Stranger Things channeled its setting mostly through the production design, Poltergeist felt like a true passion project for those that grew up with the movie, a trend that continues on with all the other offerings. Now, in talking about the 80s, you may notice I haven't really talked about slashers, arguably the most popular horror subgenre within that decade. Well, that's about to change because the final big IP house based on 80s media and representing slashers would be Halloween 4: The Return of Michael Myers. Based on the 1988 film of the same name and located in the Shrek Theater, this house would be the third Michael Myers based house in under 10 years. And with this house, they would not only channel the slasher, but specifically another 80s horror trope, the slasher sequel. Much like the film it was based on, this house didn't carry as many iconic moments as its predecessors. However, it also felt perfect for the property and worked as a solid addition to the lineup, bringing one of the more overlooked yet beloved Halloween films to life. Moments like the bandaged Michael Myers, Penny's service station, and a couple appearances by Jamie Lloyd blended in with sets that may not have had the same wow factor as the previous houses, but worked especially within such a restricting house location. Despite this though, this house really boils down to Michael Myers, appearing and disappearing to scare you, complete with his infamous soundtrack stings. So in a way, its inclusion feels even more like the film, which was released due to the popular demand for Michael Myers after Halloween 3 took the franchise in a different direction. While it doesn't have the same analog feel as Poltergeist or even Stranger Things to a degree, it feels representative of another aspect of 80s horror that is beloved by many. Now, while those three properties were marketed as the event's triple feature of 80s horror to a degree, there were a few other original houses that felt inspired by the horror of the decade. Carnival Graveyard Rest in Pieces feels inspired by 1981's The Fun House with its theme and execution. Dead Exposure Patient Zero, a sequel to 2008's Dead Exposure House, is directly set in 1982 and features the dark take on zombies popularized by Dawn and Day of the Dead. Seeds of Extinction brings a concept similar to the pulpy plant horror of Creepshow and blends it in with a shopping mall setting to tie it greater into the 80s. And who could forget about Slaughter Cinema, the drive-in B-movie marathon that stole all of our hearts, giving us 80s inspired schlock like Shitty's Kids, Devil Dogs, and Midnight Snack 2 based on the decade's infamous B-movies and creature features. The theme even went beyond the houses and into the streets. The New York Scare Zone Vamp 85 New Year's Eve not only brought forward a sequel to the insanely successful Vamp 55 Zone back in 2016, but also had lots of fun with the big fashion and music of the mid-80s. Also, the Killer Clowns from Outer Space had a highly successful scare zone outside of Sting Alley based on the 1988 cult classic that we'll get into a bit later. And Michael Myers wasn't the only slasher icon to come to this event, as Chucky reappeared for a twisted take on 80s childhood toys in Hollywood Boulevard's Revenge of Chucky scare zone. While not everything was based on the 80s, there was an obvious effort with HHN 28 to pay homage to the various styles of horror found within the decade. There's a lot to love in the 80s, which made this event successful. very successful. So in hindsight, it doesn't seem surprising that Universal would want to capitalize on that, especially because their biggest moneymaker for 2018 already had a second season worth of material to adapt, with a third on the way. Unsurprisingly, Stranger Things was announced once again to be coming to Halloween Horror Nights, this time based on seasons 2 and 3, the latter of which was set to be released just a couple months before Horror Nights began. However, it wouldn't just be Stranger Things that came back, as the entire 80s theme of the event would be bigger and maybe even better at Halloween Horror Nights 29. Like the year prior, HHN 29 would offer 10 haunted houses and 5 scare zones, with 6 of those houses being IP based and 4 being originals. The event would also run for more nights than ever before, bringing fear to the max for 42 nights between September 6th and November 2nd. While this event channeled similar vibes to its incredibly popular predecessor, it had a unique identity of its own, and that was seen as soon as you arrived. Upon entering the gates of Halloween Horror Nights 29, the vibe was different. Rather than hearing the familiar music of those nostalgic IPs, the sounds of synthwave paired with the neon lighting emitting from every which way created an all-new atmosphere for the event. It didn't take long to realize this was a different take on the 80s than the year prior, with the digitized atmosphere overtaking the grittiness. While this year also boasted a triple feature of 80s themed IPs to host haunted houses, this lineup felt a bit more on the nose than the previous one, and that's not a bad thing. Of course, I already mentioned Stranger Things, which would be taking over Soundstage 25, which previously saw Poltergeist. Riding on the massive success and accolades given to the previous house, this one would mostly track the events of the show's second season and briefly dip into the third season, mostly in the Starcourt Mall finale. While the first house had what I consider to be a really solid blend of story and scare, this one wasn't as strong, as it had a harder time juggling 2 seasons worth of story versus the original, which dedicated more time to developing its different locations. There were some really well crafted set pieces, such as the arcade machines featuring the title card, and of course the Mind Flayer scene with the incredible puppet work, but didn't hit exactly the same mark due to the sort of tonal shift and the juggling of both seasons. While the original Stranger Things and its house at HHN felt like stories that happened to be set within the 80s, the second and third seasons of the show and the house they inspired felt more like an 80s story, which really added to the feel of this event year specifically. The next house acting as this year's premier throwback IP would be one very familiar to the history of the park itself, Ghostbusters. Based on the iconic 1984 film and located in Soundstage 22. This house, like Poltergeist the year before, had it all. The score, the dialogue, the sets, the moments, every piece of this house felt like it was ripped from the silver screen and brought before your eyes. With a mix of puppets, large props, and Pepper's Ghost style projections, the practical ghosts with so much personality truly came to life and reflected a lot of the original charm of that film. Seeing the expansive hotel sets, Zool's Gateway, and of course the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man finale really embraced the iconography of the Ghostbusters world while bringing the gravitas that only HHN can. And while this house wasn't super heavy on the scares compared to Poltergeist and American Werewolf, it carries the same tonal balance of the movie, being funny without being the over-the-top comedy house of the year. Ghostbusters is, I think, the prime example of HHN throwbacks at their best, showing off memorable moments with excellent scenic design and special effects, while also adding the edge of some fun and unique scares. Now, we didn't get any slasher sequels this year, but we did get another cult classic 80s IP within the Shrek House location. Killer Clowns from Outer Space. This house, based on the beloved 1988 B-movie, was built on the back of the super successful Scare Zone the year prior. However, while that Scare Zone focused more on the crazy clowns infiltrating the streets of Crescent Cove, this house would bring their funhouse spaceship to life, in addition to some scenes inside of Crescent Cove itself. Additions like the Officer Mooney police station scene and the Clown Cathedral, complete with the appearance of Clownzilla, did a great job in and bringing the wackier elements of the movie to the haunted house. However, like Halloween 4 before it, the success of this house didn't come from super grand and complicated effects, but more the clowns themselves, who carried over the fantastic costume design from the previous year's Scare Zone. That, paired with the fun sets and silly sound effects, brought a colorful atmosphere while also confining it to a tightness found only through the Sheck location. And in keeping with the spirit of the movie itself, wildcard elements in the form of many guest-activated scare triggers were littered across the house, providing additional effects to enhance the experience. Killer Clowns from Outer Space brought a unique atmosphere found only through the film that inspired it, acting as a successful exploration of the campier side of 80s horror. While HHN 28 brought the 80s to more of its original concepts for both houses and scare zones, HHN 29 still spread the neon-soaked nightmare all across Universal Studios Florida. That is nowhere more evident than the Anarcade Scare Zone at the front of the park, which focused on a deadly 80s arcade game. Glowing slashers wielded flashing chainsaws as black lights and retro arcade cabinets lined the streets. Pair that with some sweet synthwave, and you have the makings for one of the most aesthetically pleasing scare zones of all time, and one that perfectly set the tone for the vibe of this event. The other main example of this aesthetic comes by way of another fan favorite, the Marathon of Mayhem Lagoon Show. This show, which used water, lighting, and projection effects, paid tribute to the analog aesthetics of the decade with appearances by the Ghostbusters, Stranger Things, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and the Universal Classic Monsters, who also had a house at the event this year. Like Anarcade, the distinct colors and sounds of the decade play a key role in creating a connection between the properties, and it acts as a synthesis of basically everything I've talked about into one experience. Bringing the nostalgia of famous scenes and imagery from the 80s and combining it with something familiar yet fresh created by Universal themselves. And I think that is the most important aspect of HHN's exploration of the 80s. From An American Werewolf in London to Poltergeist, from Stranger Things to Ghostbusters, from Slaughter Cinema to Killer Clowns, there's both a desire to recreate the lightning in the bottle magic found through those original films, yet use the unique medium of a haunted house to tell that story. The creativity behind all those inspired by the decade was brought to life through building these scenes not as moments on a screen, but living, breathing set pieces, echoing a lot of the boots on the ground process that those original creatives had to go through. But even when it comes to stuff outside of recreating scenes on film, the idea of building something new from the memories and art that inspires you is something so integral in these offerings, and to me, it really just shows the dedication that goes into making something of this nature. I'll always be super partial to 80s horror. It was really what got me into the genre to begin with. And with these 2 years of HHN and the success that followed them, it shows that so many people are obsessed with that look and feel of the time period. I think Universal found representation in many corners of the genre for the decade, and created many beloved haunted houses and scare zones doing so. But anyways, that's all I really got. Let me know in the comments which of these houses were your favorite if you went either of these years, or better yet, what is your favorite 80s horror movie? Are you more a fan of the slashers, or maybe the wild and campy stuff? I really want to know. Thank you all for being so patient with me and the uploads. I thought I'd come back after a bit of a break with a video I've been working on for no joke over a year. I've had this back and forth process with this video and kind of putting it together, and I'm really proud of this one, so I hope you enjoyed it. But yes, I am back. I plan on making more videos for you all as we transition from 2023 to 2024, and if you want to see those as they come out, your best bet will be leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. I truly appreciate it, and you get to see the videos when I upload them. I know this video is running a bit long, but I want to thank you all for watching it, and I'll of course see you in the next one. Take care, everybody.